Hello, hello, hello.
Hey,
I'm
Jake.
so excited to have Mariam with me for a second time. Second time in a year. So we met a year ago. Now we're meeting again. But it's like meeting a whole new being because it's like there's been so many changes. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me back. It's really good to see you. And what a year. Just to say, like, we've just been sitting here before starting and just going into how crazy, yeah, how many big shifts there have been in such a short period of time.
I know typically we look back day after day and we don't feel that there are any changes happening. But then when you take a bigger chunk like a year and you see, whoa, there's been quite a lot of changes in a short amount of time. And personally, I feel like there's been so many internal identity deaths. And I don't know if you feel the same way, you probably do. But it's sometimes external things that happen that really shift your internal world, or sometimes in my case at least, it was like my internal world shifting and then my external world reflecting those shifts.
Yeah, I hear that. There's been a lot of external shifts for me in the last year that have obviously had a ripple on effect internally. But what I realize is whilst you're in them, it's not necessarily something you're very conscious of. And I really like what you said, how after a period of time, we look back and we reflect and we're like, oh my goodness.
I love that we get to reflect together today.
Yes.
And you definitely had huge changes, which you mentioned before we started the podcast that you'd be open to talking about a little bit. But you did lose your father back in the summer. And that was perhaps, I would say, most people's greatest fear is to lose a loved one. Definitely.
Yeah, it was a very interesting experience to go through because from a very young age, my family was very straightforward about death. It was only quite recently that I realized people are very secretive about death and don't talk about it. But since I was a kid, my mother was like, oh, one day we're going to die, get over it. But when something like that happens, and it could be the death of a loved one, it could be some other major shift somebody is going through, it definitely it takes you to a place of getting to the bare bones of what you are here for, what you need to do. It's an experience that I feel really takes you back to a sort of bare space, right?
Like a stripped down version of you, because whatever attachment perhaps that you had to someone or something is now no longer there in that form, at least. And it feels like a stripping down of oneself, and to in a lot of ways come face to face with all that you are in many ways.
Yeah, because we identify so much of ourselves through our relationships, through our practices, through our actions, through our lifestyle. We're so identified. So if there's a person that has been influential on us, like a parent, for example, or like someone very, very close, we form an identity through that relationship. And actually, these big shifts, they're very catalyzing because they allow us to unpick which parts of ourselves are in that role, for example. And yeah, of course, there's like a humbling that comes through grief. We've really started in the deep end here. Like I didn't expect.
We
We're
did.
like gone straight in.
We went straight in.
But yeah, you were sharing with me about your time in India. And not to divert, I tend to do that when it comes to an emotionally charged subject.
That's okay.
But you were telling me about how you were visiting the Kali temples and how you made your way there recently for the first time. And that is a similar sort of stripping bare kind of Kali is the deity of death and rebirth and transformation and catalyzing change. And I wanted to hear also about your time there, just to throw the throw the ball in your
Throw the ball in my court. I will gladly catch that ball because, yes, so I went to India for the first time this year. And the first time I went to India, I was to Pondicherry. And that was a full-on pilgrimage experience where every day I'm visiting a new temple. I'm really tuning into the different elements. So the temples I visited were space, water, earth, fire. I didn't get to do air. And also the mother temple, which was really, really special on our last day there. And so there's all of these different activations that are taking place. I actually also went, that I didn't share with you, to a marriage temple.
Oh.
Because an astrologer told me that there was some sort of like black dot on like my marriage section.
How interesting.
And I needed to go to a marriage temple to clear it out.
Wow.
So I had a whole like marriage ritual done.
Really?
Yeah.
What, just you and the
just
pundit?
me and the priests, and Aude was with me too.
Okay.
And she's like, why not? Let's do it, you know?
But to what, like...
To I
clear
feel like the way that I interpreted this even more was commitment to the inner journey, to the inner union, more than anything. I find that external marriage is something that if it were to happen in my life, or when it happens in my life, comes from a place of me being also as integrated as I can be. Like, I'm not saying I need to be like, you know, the best version of me possible, because there are no rules when it comes to these things. But I did see how prior to that, I definitely gave my power away in a lot of relationships, not just romantic, but even with families, with friends. And I feel like that for me just marked a new commitment to being true to me. That's how I took the experience, at least.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I think, you know, definitely after the 30s in the Middle East, as a woman, it's the big question that people are constantly talking to you about, like, when are you getting married? Where are your kids?
Yes.
Like, they do remind you of, like, clocks ticking.
Yes.
And I think it is a very, like a sovereign thing to just realize, like, whether it when and whether it happens or not, firstly, is none of anyone's business. But secondly, as well, it comes from that deep space of clarity and integration. One thing I found very interesting is how sort of assuming people are on the journey of motherhood, and how everyone's like, you're a woman, okay, now do what you have to do, like have children. And I've had so many friends who've conscribed to that role knowingly, like maybe just out of really deep dharmic sort of calling to become a mother. But then, you know, the reality is there, and, you know, it's such a huge identity shift. And seeing, yes, again, this theme of like identity crumbling, and it's very interesting space and time, because there's so many of us now who are like, okay, like a little bit detached from this subject.
It's so interesting because everyone around me is obviously very attached to this topic. Like you were saying, it's like I have over 10 weddings this year, so it's a lot. And then you perhaps can question, if you're single, oh, when is it going to happen for me? Is it even for me? Do I even want this? Like, is it a conditioning? And the truth is, I don't know what the truth is when it comes to this topic, because I'm still unlearning a lot of stuff. And whether you are a mom because you have a kid, or you are maternal because you're the eldest in your family, or you just are, in a lot of ways, I find that when I look back at my own childhood, I was very maternal. I always cared for my friends, for my cousins. I'm an only child, so I didn't have siblings to take care of. But for me, my parents sometimes felt like the children that I was here to guide, interestingly, as an only child. So I just, for me at least, because motherhood is something I do deeply care about, I allowed myself to reinterpret it in a way that makes a lot of sense to me and feels very aligned to me, is that I don't need to wait for something external to remind me of who I really am internally.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, it's very, I come from a spiritual path where being brahmachari, like being renounced, is very common. You know, people much younger than me, they renounce and they commit and dedicate their entire life to God. And there's this beautiful, in the Sikh teachings, in this different lineage, but there's this whole sort of romanticization of dedicating your soul, your atma, as married to God. And that comes through a depth of spiritual practice and discipline and a detachment from the material world, where then if somebody is married or does have a family and so on, it's all an act of dedication, an act of service.
Yes.
And yeah, because then we get to the end of life and what's on your mind, right? Like that really came up for me with my dad's passing. It's like how what we've put our mind to our whole life is what determines our last thought.
Oof.
Yeah, it's not just I've done X amount of hours of practice, therefore. It's like, what has my mind dwelt on throughout my life? That's what carries me to my final breath. And in that final breath, that thought carries some weight. It's important because it determines our next point of destination.
Right. It's like, is it light as a feather or heavy as a stone?
Exactly.
Right. It's which way are you leaving? I really love that. And the way that I do see it as well is like, if you are to think, if let's say you're listening to this, you're single, you're like, why is this not happening? I would say keep centering your attention on the divine. And when you do come into external union, the way that I would like to approach it is keeping the divine centered in my relationship.
Absolutely.
Like that's central to me. That's not changing because I'm now in that relationship. It's we're doing this together. We're committed and we're devoted to this path of selfless service. And yeah.
I mean, guys, public announcement. Just joking. It's interesting. Like, I do think in life you attract what you're vibrating at, at an unconscious level as well. And interesting subject.
It is a very interesting subject, one that we didn't think we were going to discuss today. But that was my trip to India because I mentioned the marriage temple. And then I went again in March. And this one was a more creative trip. It wasn't centered around temples or pilgrimaging, or I don't even know if pilgrimaging is a word, but going on the pilgrimage. It was really a creative process. And it was very fun. And we went to Jaipur. And then I'm so grateful that we got to do Pushkar because I really, really loved the energy in Pushkar, like the lake. And we still did do some temples. And then I went back to Jaipur and my friend Zain joined me. So shout out to Zain because she's going to be watching the episode. But we were at one of the palaces and there was a Kali temple there. And I checked and I was like, do we have permission to go? We ask spaces that we see as sacred, but actually all spaces are sacred. So wherever we enter any space, just asking if we have permission to go in. And so we did that. I wasn't 100% convinced, but she really wanted to go. I was like, are you sure you're ready for this? Because Kali is really like death and rebirth and peeling off all that is not true within you. So are you ready to let go of something that you're very attached to? Yeah, okay. So we go in, and so interestingly, we actually got offerings from the temple. Like we had our offerings to the temple, but we also received like a garland of flowers. I was like, okay, good omen. Like she's gonna be nice. We're not gonna go through major shifts. And then I came back from India. I was sick. She was sick. I remember I went to see my energy therapist the next day after landing. He looks at me. He's like, are you okay? I'm like, I don't think I am. He's like, you're okay. Like deep down, you know you're okay. I was like, yes, of course. But it just feels like whatever shifts were happening internally, now it's accelerated. And I find that the only thing that kept me going was my faith and being devoted and my practices, because I remember just thinking to myself, I wonder how people do it. I wonder how people that don't cultivate this daily, how do you navigate these times of uncertainty and unknowns? Because if you don't have something to lean on to, and maybe, I don't know, like, is that why God is there, to lean on God in these times? I started to question that too today, by the way. But anyways, not to deviate. It was just a very humbling reminder that I'm so grateful that this journey started when it did, because with time, dark nights of the soul seem to get darker. at least in my experience for now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like in the Bhakti Yoga path, we don't pray for solving our problems.
Yeah.
We don't ask God for help. We ask for the challenges to come. At least the great, I can't speak for myself, but like the true devotees, that's the request, is send me more suffering, send me more challenge.
Oof.
And that's why Kali is she's so revered. She's the primordial mother. She's actually the family deity of my spiritual master Paramahamsa
Whoa,
Vishwananda.
I got full goosebumps.
Yeah, and actually she was the first deity that came to me in 2018. And it definitely is this strong stripping away of all that takes us away from God. And it's her whole goal is to like scrub us deeply so that we can be polished enough to not be ashamed when he shows his face to, when we get to meet our creator, that we're in a state where our ego and our samskaras are a little bit more purified. And as you say, like the importance of spiritual practice is primordial, because without that, how do we hold on to anything? And in the bhakti path, it's interesting because there are some people who are so devoted that they go beyond this need for spiritual practice. And they say, I'm just renounced. But you have to be really at an advanced level to do that. In our tradition, Guruji, Paramahamsa Vishwananda, he says, it is through our effort that we attain the grace. Of course, the grace is always there. God is so merciful just to like solve all our problems and make everything right so we can come back to love as quick as possible. But really, we need that little percentage of our own efforts and our own part. For me, that's a practice of Atma Kriya Yoga and Japa that Guruji gave. And I know for you, you've been exploring some sadhana recently with, is it on the tantric path with?
It's interesting, good question. It wasn't clarified, it wasn't explained in that way. Perhaps it is, but it wasn't shared necessarily or explained in that way. It just Saraswati's sadhana practice, 40 days, a call to silence. And truly, it was very interesting because when we were in Pushkar, and we had already started to plant the seeds that we were going to sit with Saraswati for 40 days. It's a field of consciousness that obviously we all have access to, and it's not to say that some do and some don't. But I do feel like the attention towards that flow of energy is what made me receive it more deeply in my being. And to return to something that you shared, it reminded me of one of my biggest lessons in India was how do I move from greed to generosity? Because one of the things that came up to the surface is how much am I asking from the divine all the time? Even if it's like, give me a sign, or like, help me solve this, or like, I want that. Like, most beings, they turn to God and there's a request of some kind. And we kind of become really greedy with the divine. And that was something that really like kind of shook me. I was like, whoa, am I being a bit greedy? Like even when it comes to spirituality and wanting something, like am I extracting from the divine in any way? These are big questions that I asked myself, so it wasn't necessarily comfortable to sit with. And then I remember as I was leaving that first trip, the answer was generosity. Just be with the divine, not to ask for anything, but just to really be, like just allow yourself to be with that presence without always demanding or asking or extracting.
And that in itself is the biggest thing you could ever get.
Yes.
And that is like the goal of any other asks we could have, like what's underlying it. Guruji, he often says like, it's that idea of like we always go like these beggars, like asking and asking, and we're forgetting the sweetest thing, which is God himself. And that's the crux, I think, of the spiritual path, is to get to that stage where we are no longer needing anything, but we're just here in service. And we're just here out of the sake of love. And many traditions, they have this idea of moksha, of attaining liberation. And for many traditions, it is like, I'm done with the death, rebirth cycles. I've attained the highest level of samadhi. I've realized who I am as a soul. And with Guruji, it's not about that at all. It's about how can I serve? I don't care if I'm in a hellish realm. Send me where I can serve you. Because it's through the relationship of serving the Lord that we build that relationship of love. And yeah, it's very interesting. And it shifts us out of this sort of new age, like manifestation narrative and that drive to constantly be, that is always focused about me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I love all the points that you mentioned, because I was asking myself lately, because when I was obviously there, I felt like a beginner in so many ways, because all of these teachings are new to me. They're unfamiliar, but they're also something that I was very thirsty for sure. And I feel like that's why I went on the yoga path all these years ago, was so I would eventually make my way to these spaces. And it's interesting because my yoga practice is not as present as it was before, like physically with the asana, but everything else is it makes a lot more sense. It's a lot more integrated. But I just remember asking myself, like, is that cycle of, because, so I'll share this thing that I learned while I was there. So God, G-O-D, the G is like the generator, that's like Brahma. Then you have O, the operator, which is Vishnu. And then D, which was the dissolver, is Shiva. And so it's like this remembering of, the three cycles of life, which is, birth, sustenance, and then death. And you were mentioning how it's not necessarily about like escaping that pattern, because I was asking myself that, like, are we meant to come out of that pattern of death and rebirth or not?
I mean, I think the more death that happens, the faster we evolve, right? Like these little or major changes that we get to experience.
Yeah.
Because what is a true death? It's the death of the ego, the death of the identity that we've created and clung on to for so many lifetimes. And even coming to this podcast, I was really contemplating on this, like, how can I be in the world, or how can I share without clinging on to an idea of myself? And yeah, it's interesting. It's funny because, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was just living in the ashram of my spiritual master in Vrindavan in India. And in that time is the least time that I was immersed in my meditation practice. Because we were just constantly serving. And there's always something to do around the ashram. And that becomes your practice. Of course, you do your sadhana, but to the, sitting here at home, like, I can do it for longer. I can wake up at 4 easily. Over there, you're not in a condition where it's as seamless, because you're just busy, or you're in a room with 20 people. You don't want to wake anyone up. And that service to the ashram, to the other people, it becomes your sadhana, it becomes your spiritual practice. And so it's a moving away out of this, like, oh, how can I, of course, actually, I've come more into the importance of a physical practice now, in order to strengthen the ability to serve. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
It is very interesting. And I do find that it is, how can we create more sanctity around anything that we're doing in life, from the dishes to the bed to the laundry to the driving, to really infuse whatever it is that we're learning, whether in our sadhana practices or on the mat or through the different teachings that we come across. What good are they if they're not being infused in every area of our lives? Because it's like, sure, I can meditate 1 hour a day, but if I'm going to start yelling at everybody that I come across all the time, I won't see the point of my meditation practice. And I remember I was so attached to my meditation practice. And interestingly, today's the one day I didn't meditate. And I just drank my tea in a very like ceremonial way. And I lit up incense and I read a bit of a book. And I was very content with it. And I feel like, obviously, with time, you can drop some of the practices for a day or two, and then you come back. It doesn't need to be as rigid, at least the way that I see it now. My truth changes a lot. So
sure, I do think, like, for listeners, especially anyone that's wanting to explore the spiritual path, the key terms here are and coming back. Because when we leave a practice because we're like, oh, I'm comfortable, and then it takes a day and two, and then it turns into 2 weeks, it's not fun, because I've been there. Because when you start practicing spiritually, I'm sure you feel the same, like your vibration changes and you feel so elated and you feel so good that if you get too comfortable when you're in that state, then, you know, when we're still learning, which we all are, it's important to have that that regularity in the sadhana, which obviously you've cultivated for years. And so it's, you know, it's nice to take those days of rest.
It's true, but it's also, I rest when I meditate. That's what's so fascinating. I woke up, I was tired today. That's why I didn't really practice. And I was like, okay, fine, fair enough. But my meditation practice actually replenishes and re-energizes.
Absolutely.
And reminds me of the sanctity in all things. And I feel like I just operate as a much better human being in general.
Yes, it makes you functional.
Yes.
It's funny, what you're sharing is, I was in Peru for the first time in January. And I think, you know, I was on the shamanic path for many years. And it was amazing to be there for the first time with Guruji, with Paramahamsa Vishwananda. Because I had been there a few days before, and we went to Pisac, the Sacred Valley, and I hiked up this mountain, the Jaguar Mountain, and like made my offerings. And I felt very much, you know, Pachamama there, like the strength of Mother Earth. She's alive. It's very, very strong. And the people there are so devoted. And I came back to Lima a few days later to start our pilgrimage with Guruji, and he called me over straight away, and he said to me, how was your time? He laughingly was like, did you connect with Pachamama? And I was like, yes. And I went to the Sacred Valley, and he was like, tell me one thing. Is there anywhere on earth that is not sacred? Is there anywhere or anything on earth that is not sacred? And it really caught me by surprise. And he looked at me in the eyes and he said to me, it's time that you find that everywhere, basically, now. And I took it so to heart that I immediately just ran off and I was like, I'm not talking to anyone. I'm going to meditate and find God now. And it was funny because obviously that passion wore off after a day. And then after 2 days, you know, I was a bit less determined and I got back in my mind. And by the end of the trip, he was giving a satsang and he said, like, it's not just to sit like this. It's, as you say, in everything.
Yeah.
And one way that I find that can be touched upon is through mantra practice. Because you can carry mantra with you everywhere. You can drive mantra, you can get angry, you get your mantra in the mind, whatever it is, you come back to that recourse, that deep resource that is the divine and the divine alive in the name. And it's a very powerful practice.
It is a very powerful practice. And you had mentioned like New Age spirituality, and you're also talking about mantras, because today we have trillions of mantras. We've got many mantras. And again, it's not to discredit any of them. And at the same time, it's just perhaps to ask you, like, there are clear differences between the mantras that you're chanting and the ones that you're talking about, right? And the other ones that are perhaps like, I can manifest everything that I desire.
That's an affirmation.
That's an affirmation?
I would call that an affirmation.
Fair. So there's a difference between mantras and affirmations.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Yeah, I mean, people call them mantras, but
yes.
I think that is a gross misuse of the term. Mantra, it's prayer of the heart. It's a heart prayer. And trang, it's the waves of the mind. So you're like really stilling with the name of the divine, the waves of the mind. And in Sanskrit, you know, there's so many mantras. It's endless. But in our spiritual tradition, Guruji gives one mantra. Okay. He gives many, but one that is your mantra that you do for minimum an hour a day of practice. Wow. And so that really, I think it is important, you know, it's beautiful to explore many mantras, but to have that singularity with a mantra that you're committed to. The mantra we chant is Shri Vithala Giridhari Parabrahmane Namaha. And in that, you know, you can unpack so many divine stories and so much beauty in that. That could be a conversation for another time. But it is very powerful to have that one mantra that you connect to. And what's even more powerful is through a practice like Atma Kriya, or, you know, if you have a spiritual master, is the initiation into the mantra. Because you can find so many mantras on the internet. Like our spiritual master gave us a mantra related to a sacred practice that I will not name, but necessarily, that mantra it's a secret mantra. When he gives it to you, it's a secret. You can't repeat it out loud after he's given it. It's just for your ears, and you memorize it. You don't write it, you stay with it. But you can find that mantra online. But the secrecy is in the initiation. The activation of it comes through that initiation, which in Atma Kriya is called the Shaktipat, which is the descent of grace. It's the descent of the lineage in its intactness, and the master's promise to stay and to liberate the practitioner. This is comes through the grace of Shaktipat. And so that I would say is kind of like a distinction between Googling a mantra, which is still powerful, and chanting it, obviously not the affirmations, I feel bliss, but really a lineage mantra, and practicing it versus receiving the initiation, which people can receive through Atma Kriya Yoga or other practices with a bona fide spiritual master of different tradition.
Which is something that you're offering here in Dubai as well.
Yes.
And I saw it through your stories the other day that there were a few people that got certified over the weekend.
Yeah, it's cute. It's very exciting.
It is really exciting, and it's really special that you are on that path as well, and you've been on this path for so long, but it's like you're refining it so much so that you are perhaps even more directional with what it is. Directional, and I would say intentional.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think for many years I had a plethora of practices, so it was a little bit, but now that I've anchored into what my personal practice is, it's much clearer what I want to share. And Atma Kriya, it is a practice so I've taught Kundalini for many years, Kundalini Yoga, and it's an amazing practice. I mean,
I've practiced with you, and it is an amazing practice. Yeah.
It's amazing. But the difference between Atma Kriya and other schools of Kriya Yoga is that it is an embodied practice of the 9 forms of bhakti. Okay. So it's actually not I'm doing a practice to gain anything. It's I'm doing a practice to love God. And the course itself, it's a philosophical dive into what these 9 forms of bhakti are, what these 9 ways of relating and loving God are. And then people get that practice to do, and it's quite condensed. There's Kriya traditions where there's thousands of Kriyas. Here at Guruji and Mahavatar Babaji, they've condensed it to a set amount of practices, and so it's very directed. Yeah,
it's very fascinating because I find with these different practices, I remember when I was at the beginning of my yoga journey, I felt like I was called towards one lineage, or like one branch of yoga, which was the asana practice, but also the self-study, because I love to study and I love to learn. And then I opened up many portals, and then I dabbled in many different things. And I would say the one thing that remained throughout was my devotion and service. And it's so clear. It's like, just let me serve in whatever way you want me to. And I feel like the way that I see it, and it's interesting because I feel like we touched upon this once, but I see myself emptying myself of all the things that I think I am or want. And then I just allow for a greater power to just move me in a certain direction. And in the past, I used to ask, okay, are we sure? Is this it? And today there's a lot more surrender and being okay, this is where you want me to go. And just because we spoke a lot about identity deaths, I feel like it does require a lot of identity deaths to be able to really hear transmissions or feel transmissions that are coming through, and not doubt it. Because if the body's very clogged and there's a lot of blockages, whether energetic, physical, emotional, I feel like the transmission just kind of goes in all the different directions, and you're I'm scattered, I don't know where to go. Rather than when you start to really fine-tune this physical instrument through these different practices, I do find that whatever is then transmitted is a lot more aligned and truthful and in integrity. And you can let me know if this is what you feel too. The moment, in the past, there were a lot of places where I was, let's say, misaligned, which I would say the real misalignment is that you're not connected to the divine. That's the major one. But today, if there's any part where I go somewhere, even in thought, I get like a whiplash.
Mm-hmm.
But not like, okay, God is punishing me, but it's like
Snap back.
snap back right away. And there's like no time to play anymore. It's like you have to do this faster and faster.
Totally. And that for me, my snapback is the mantra.
Okay.
Because like, and you're just back on your thing, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting what you say about like making decision and having that nuance. I was listening, I'm studying right now, I'm studying philosophy in my lineage, and the teacher was giving a course on yogic philosophy, and someone asked like, how do I know what my path is? And he was saying like, I can't speak for you, like I'm not mystical like that, but I can say that like make a decision, and then whatever's not meant for you is going to reveal itself eventually. And so like things pan out. And it's interesting, you know, in the Bhagavad Gita, there are different ways of practicing yoga. So there's karma yoga, which is like I'm acting in service, and through that I'm purifying my karma and, you know, acting for the sake of something greater. Okay, beautiful path, super honorable. You know, you're doing action in the world to purify for the goal of that. And then there's jnana yoga, which is the path of knowledge, which is I'm learning about the self. I'm taking in physical, you know, knowledge about spirituality. And it's said in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says that the highest path is bhakti. And when we are in devotion, everything else gets taken care of. The sense of identity, the acting in the world, like all of those other questions, it's covered by bhakti. There's nothing in which the relationship to God and cultivating that love, that it doesn't cover for us in life. It takes care of everything. It's saying, I'm giving myself to you, and then everything else falls into place organically because it has to.
So the question then, to circle it back to where we started from, have your practices, like your devotional practices, allowed you to traverse some of the most challenging things humans can experience with more faith and trust and all of that? And you feel like life took care of itself because you just infuse more of that devotion?
Yeah, and I would say like I got a heads up beforehand.
Okay.
Like there was a buffer that came through my practice that announced what was going to happen with the loss of my dad. Like it was a pretty, I don't think I'm ready to talk about it today, but a pretty dramatic, you know, exit, and very hard, you know, for myself and my family. But basically it was buffered for me. And I think that came in like a couple of years before I was in a ceremony, and I started sobbing at the idea of losing my parents. And I spoke to a therapist about it. I was like, why does this keep coming up? And she said, your nervous system is prepping itself for that. And I think it's important in life, you know, to be very sort of, you know, we're going to die. We're going to die. Like everyone is going to die. It's, you know, I know there's a lot of, I don't know if it's artificial intelligence or this new science that wants to make us immortal and all sorts of regeneration. And so I don't know what people are doing injecting themselves with these days to be immortal. But the only true
immortality has always been one of the quests of a human being.
You can attain it with Kriya, because the Kriya lineage comes through Babaji, who's a 5,000-year-old yogi. But that's maybe a little far out for this conversation. But yeah, it's this idea of like, we're going to die. If the death of another is so shocking to us, what about our own?
Yes.
You know, so how do we prepare ourselves in that best way is through continuous practice, continuous service. Wherever my mind wanders to dwell on me, myself and I, or other problems in life, what tools am I applying myself to on a daily, regular basis to bring myself back? Because we often think, and I thought this for many years, is like there's going to be a shift in my life where I have an experience through my ceremonies, through my meditate, through whatever, and then I'm never going to be the same again. But actually that shift comes through that daily drip of dedication.
So true, by the way. It's not like a complete transformation in one go. And I feel like when you really work with everything in life, everything that is offered to us, whether the elements of life, whether nature, and you combine all of these things. For me, like I love working with the moon, and in India, of course, astrology is huge there too. I just feel like all of these things allows me to really go through these cycles a little bit more easily, even being more in tune with your moon as a woman, I feel like that's helped me understand
Oh,
the
absolutely.
cycles of death and rebirth.
Totally. Cyclical awareness is a must.
Exactly.
If you're a woman or live with a woman, like it's a must.
And I feel like all of these things have actually been there for us to learn from. And because of these huge advancements in technology, which serve a purpose, we've kind of forgotten the intelligence of the body, the intelligence of life itself. And one of the things that came through for me is that there's no intelligence, whether AI or even me as a being, that is going to ever be greater or match the greater intelligence.
Absolutely. Oh, amen to that.
So yeah.
I think I have to caveat that the biggest change for me has been relying on my spiritual master as my resource for everything. Having a teacher that can guide just through it may not be me asking him a question about something, but just putting on the satsang of Paramahamsa Vishwananda and just listening to what the message is for the day changes everything. Because in this Vak, in the speech of the Guru, in the transmission of the Guru, is something much greater, because it's his own consciousness. It's the consciousness of a realized being. And so when I'm listening to satsang, that has been a big change in my life, is listening to the teachings. It takes me out of my struggle with life, or my struggle inside myself, and it gives me a doorway of opening where I can touch something that is beyond this normal conception of how my consciousness functions in a limited way. And I can touch divinity through having a living master, through the satsangs and through the teachings. So that has been a very big saving grace for me in different moments of change.
I'm so grateful for all the things and all the experiences that led you towards this path and towards your guru in this lifetime. I feel like that's such a gift to honor and be so grateful for, because then we get to sit across you and also learn so much from you too. And thank you so much for your time today. It's wild how sitting with you can just fly by. And I enjoyed our conversation, a little bit unexpected in some places.
Yes,
I was like, wow, we're touching upon interesting points, but all enjoyable. So thank you.
Thank you, Maria. It's really nice to talk again.
Yeah. Maybe a third one next year.
Third time lucky.
Third time, yeah. And we'll see what happens in a year's time.
Yes.
That could be our regular, little check-in.
Touch-in next year. Yeah.
Deal.
Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. Thank you.
Thank you.